Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez, and I'm an editor for LatAm List, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latamlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Claire Díaz-Ortiz, a best-selling author, angel investor, and the newest partner at Magma Partners, where she will be leading Brava, an initiative that seeks to invest in more Latin American female founders. They talk about Brava, the importance of investing in women, and what it's like to run a business in emerging markets. They also discuss Claire's impressive trajectory, from starting a nonprofit organization in an orphanage in Kenya to becoming one of Twitter's early employees and working with the Vatican. Claire also talks about her decision to move to Argentina, where she has been living for the past 10 years. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Claire Díaz-Ortiz.
Hey, Claire, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, officially have to welcome you into Magma, so welcome.
Yes, it's been an exciting down low 6 months, hasn't it?
It has. You're coming out of the shadows into the light after working together for the last 6 months.
And I'm going to finally go and update my LinkedIn now. It's been very funny to sometimes chat with portfolio companies who are very confused about my role.
Yeah, it's gonna be good to get that all cleared up. So tell our listeners about what you're going to be doing at Magma.
Sure. So I'm Claire, and I'm going to be joining Magma as a partner to focus on investments in the Southern Cone, but also to spin out an initiative called Brava, which is our initiative to invest in female founders in Latin America. And so we're hoping with Magma's Fund 3 that we will invest in at least 20 female co-founded or female solely founded companies in LatAm. And I'm so excited. I'm super passionate about female founders and about pushing forward the ecosystem.
Talk a little bit about some of the ones that have started to do really well.
Sure. So we've got 4 incredible companies, and they were kind of all at different stages when we invested, but they all have this one thing in common, which is they have these really spectacular female founders. So we've got Prometeo, which is like the Plaid of Latin America. We've got the Intern Group, which is a company that you and I have both been familiar with for about 10 years now, which is kind of amazing. And we've got FlickPlay, and we've got Heffa, and Heffa is really rocking it. Heffa just made it to the TechCrunch Disrupt Finals, I think beating out 1,995 other companies. Heffa is a women's bank that's going to be in America and the US. And we've just been kind of amazed to see how well Heffa's been doing, but also amazed to see how well all 4 of these companies have been doing in the first 6 months of kind of hanging out with us.
That was one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you join up as a partner, is the focus on building out Brava. Talk a little bit more about Brava and why it's important.
Sure. I mean, so I have long been passionate about investing in women ever since my undergraduate degree in Feminist Studies. But I think it took me a long time to really understand the business case for doing it. You know, I started my career in a nonprofit. And so I think I always used to think about investing, or, you know, whether it's in dollars and time, in underrepresented people as a social impact thing, not an investment, actual business thing. And so I think what really has changed for me over the last 5 years as I've sort of become an angel investor and now a VC is realizing the incredible business case for investing in women, and sort of feeling like, you know, I've seen the light, and now I just want to like bash people's heads in with it because it's so obvious.
So I was going to go dig into that deeper in a bit here, but since we got onto it here, let's bash people over the head with it some. Why is it so good and necessary to invest in women?
So in the last 5 to 10 years, we have just seen this incredible wave of studies come out showing that any teams with female founders or female co-founders or females in the C-suite end up performing better. So, I mean, you can sort of take your pick of the stats. You know, female founders generate 2.5x more revenue per dollar than male founders. companies with female co-founders exit at least 1 year faster than the rest of the market. Female founded companies perform 63% better than all male founding teams. So it's sort of like, okay, this is obvious. We get this, right? Diversity on a team helps. And I think from a really basic perspective, when I think of how I talk to my toddlers, for example, it makes sense. If I was stuck in one of those like escape rooms, right? And I was stuck with 5 other people and I had to get out, I really, really hope those 5 other people don't look exactly like me and think exactly like me, right? Because one of the best ways to come up with innovative solutions is to have people coming from different perspectives and different viewpoints. So the problem though, when it comes to startup investing, is that overwhelmingly about 85 to 90% of investors with check writing abilities are white men, right? And so because of the natural and sometimes not natural biases that we all operate in this world, it means that a lot of these folks, these white men, are not investing in female founders or underrepresented founders. And some of the data is showing now that it looks like a female VC is up to 3 times more likely to invest in a female founder than a male VC. So the numbers are really, really stark. So, it's not hard to sort of make the conclusion, as my high school English teacher would tell us in one of those 5-paragraph essays, right? The data shows us that when you have a woman on the founding team, your company is going to do better. And the data also shows us that we are not investing in enough women. Okay, so what would make a VC firm really successful and get great returns? Invest in more freaking women. So that's the concept of Brava. And Brava is an initiative that we're starting at Magma to do just that. And we've got a really strong operator network, is what we're calling it, of mentors and advisors who are going to really help make our portfolio companies fly, or help them to fly even further, I should say. And, so far we've made 4 investments in incredible teams. And I'm just so excited every day by, all the new pitches that are coming in and the new entrepreneurs we're seeing, because I just think there is something really important about sort of setting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what we are here for. We want to encourage female founders, because I think everyone agrees that when you start to say something like that, all of a sudden they start coming out of the woodwork and you're like, wait, where were you all along? But it's just, I, as a woman, have always known that when I have been encouraged by female mentors and females in tech, I am more likely to fly and to do well. And so that's really what it's about.
Yeah. And one of the things that I like the most about when we started talking about this over a year ago now, I think, was one, the business case is obvious, as you said, it hits you over the head. And then the other is that everything that we're doing with Brava is in addition to all of the awesome stuff that you would get as a founder inside of Magma. So you get all the Magma stuff plus the operator network and some of the additional mentorship opportunities in addition to the obvious part, which is the check.
Absolutely. I think, it was funny. I was talking with Jenny at Flourish the other day, and we were just talking about something related, and she said something like, words matter. And it was kind of on a tangential conversation. And I said, yes. And I think that's exactly why doing something like this matters. It's because you're saying that you care. And then as a result, kind of, you can see the ecosystem rise up around you, if that makes sense. I think one of the worst arguments that I hear frequently from investors about why you shouldn't have initiatives or funds or groups focused on just female founders is this idea that, well, female founders should be competing just like everyone else in all the regular funds. But I think that if anything about sort of the last 6 months in the Black Lives Matter movement has become clear to people, it's just that biases exist. We all have biases. We're all born with biases, and it's really important to know what they are and to try to work on them. But some of them will just always be natural, right? I am a white woman and I went to Stanford, and a lot of my friends were in my freshman dorm with me. And 20 years later, a lot of those people are the people that I still do business with, right? So if you kind of translate that into, okay, let's say you're a white man who went to Stanford and you're one of, the 85% majority in VCs, most of the friends you have, most of the founders are going to look like you. And so that's why it's so important, I think, to put a stake in the ground and say, listen, we want female founders from Latin America to come forward because we want to fund you.
One of the things that is a parallel to this that I also resonated a lot when we started talking about doing something like this was that it fits really nicely with a piece of our investment thesis and of the companies that have done really well, which are kind of the overlooked founders in LatAm. I think one of our superpowers inside of Magma is that all of our partners are basically immigrants in different areas. Pedro is a Chilean immigrating to the US. You are from the US immigrating to Argentina, and I am from the US and spent time living in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. So I think we end up seeing different things where, in the morning I can be with a really rich family that's going to be one of our LPs, but in the afternoon I can still be treated the same as whatever immigrant is coming to Mexico or Chile when they won't open a bank account for me or will not allow me to rent an apartment because I don't have the correct documents or whatever it might be. So I think it's an interesting angle to, in addition to what we've been doing at a core of Magma.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've said this to you at times that, in the 6 months that I've been at Magma, I think the thing I have really kind of become clear on about, what makes Magma such a great seed investor in LatAm is that I think that Magma is really particularly poised to look sort of beyond the typical trappings of prestige in founders and to look for founders who really have resilience and grit and are really building something impressive and are really dedicated and are really here to, quote unquote, change the world. And I think that one of the reasons for that is also because of some of the privilege that we have. I mean, I was privileged to basically grow up in Silicon Valley, so I'm not that amazed by it, if that makes sense. And so it's easier for me and us as a collective to sort of see beyond those kind of shiny things and instead look for founders who are really, building great businesses and doing great things. And if they need the help or the bridge to get them on the path to Silicon Valley, we can do that, and we can make those introductions and open those gates, essentially, so to speak.
So let's go back into your background a little bit. You mentioned that you went to Stanford, but where are you from originally, and what did you study that took you down this path?
Sure. So I'm from Berkeley, California, the Athens of the West. And my mom was in finance and my dad was a journalist growing up. I went to Stanford, and at Stanford, I did an undergraduate degree in history and feminist studies and a master's in anthropology. And then after Stanford, I spent about 5 years sort of being, as my father has said, a wandering delinquent. My first year of being a wandering delinquent, I escaped to a town in Mexico that I read about in a book. And I went there and sort of did a whole lot of nothing for a year. I had this amazing but horrible online editing job that basically paid my bills. And, given that the bills in San Francisco were a lot higher than the bills living in Mexico, it sort of allowed me to kind of start building this weird international life. And I did that over the next 5 years, ultimately landing in an orphanage in Kenya, where I started a nonprofit organization, which I did full-time for a couple of years. And then that led me to business school at Oxford in the UK. Jeff Skoll of eBay fame started the Skoll Foundation, and he funds social entrepreneurs to get their MBAs. And I had this nonprofit. It was growing at the time. I thought, okay, I think I should go to business school. It had never been something I was interested in. I was super fascinated by, anthropology and writing, and I started writing my first book at that point. But I saw the need to sort of build this nonprofit and understand basically management. So I ended up going to business school. And while I was at business school, things really took a turn. I had been living in Kenya, and the reason that I had been able to get this nonprofit off the ground is because I had this blog that was popular. And at the time, if you were blogging in 2006, you were probably blogging on blogger.com, which is where I was blogging. And right around that time, the folks at blogger.com decided to incubate out this little sort of 2-week side project, which was Twitter. And so they had kind of found my blog randomly. They promoted it. The blog was doing well. They said, hey, why don't you sign up for this little tool, Twitter, and see if you like it. And I did like it. And I sort of became one of those early kind of influencers talking about doing good and running this nonprofit. I don't know if there was anyone in Kenya on Twitter at the time when I, joined and started tweeting. So it was really, useful to me in my nonprofit life. And so while I was at business school, Bizstone, one of the co-founders of Twitter, came over for an event, and we got to talking, and he offered me an internship to basically look at what is called corporate social innovation at Twitter. So I went and did that. And then when the internship ended, I did an internship. I wrote a thesis for Oxford about social innovation at Twitter. And then I just stayed on at the company. And when I started the internship, there were about 50 people there. And when I left the company, there were about 5,000. I stayed for about 5.5 years. And it was an incredible ride. I mean, I had a really fantastic time doing a lot of different things. Probably half of my overall work over those years was focused on what we called corporate social innovation, which is basically coming up with innovative ways to do well by doing good. So we created a nonprofit Ads for Good program. We ran some philanthropic initiatives. And then the other half of it was really on the side of growth marketing. So at Twitter at the time, we had this theory that the way you could get a market or a demographic, whether it be, sports or people in Guatemala, to start using Twitter was to go find sort of like the most famous person within that demographic or within that, larger community and get them on the platform and then get them start tweeting organically. And then that would, get all their sort of followers and interested parties on board. And so I had started doing that sometimes in philanthropic circles. So, oftentimes actors and actresses, a way to try to get them on Twitter would be to run a philanthropic campaign for one of their favorite nonprofits, for example. And then we came across, I should say some important data analysts at Twitter came across something that at the time they thought was an anomaly one day. They were looking through a bunch of tweets, this was 2011, and trying to find kind of the most engaged tweets they could. And they kept coming across this fact that Bible verses and tweets about the Bible were doing really, really well. And, they thought it was just something weird, but the more they dug into it, the more they found that no, it was real. Tweets about Bible verses and basically Christian content on Twitter was punching way above its weight. And so when I say punching way above its weight, I mean, you might have a pastor with 500 followers who was getting as much engagement as, a celebrity with 100,000. Those are just made up numbers, but it was like that. And so, we had a small team, a media team, and we basically were the people that went out and tried to find famous people to get them on the platform. And, it was sort of presented that, hey, why don't we do this within the vertical of religion? I don't think anyone in social media was thinking about religion as, a great onboarding strategy at the time, but Twitter was. And so I was sort of tasked with doing that. And so I spent a lot of time with US-based mega churches, I would say, and then eventually ended up working with the Vatican for about a year to get the Pope on Twitter. And so that was, totally my career highlight was that. It was an amazing experience. I loved working with the Vatican. I've always said that they were faster and smoother, and they presented less friction on the launch than our own side at Twitter did. So it was kind of interesting. People always think of the Vatican as this really, really slow moving institution, but my experience with their team was incredibly positive and just I was just amazed by some of the innovative stuff they came up with. So that was sort of my journey at Twitter. While I was at Twitter, I had started writing books. So I published my first book when I was just in my first year at Twitter. And then my second book I wrote while I was there and published it. It was called Twitter for Good, Change the World One Tweet at a Time. And I realized that I just loved this writing thing. And so I kept sort of on the schedule of coming out with a book every 2 years or so for a different publisher, usually on some topic of business or marketing. And, eventually it sort of got to the end of my journey at Twitter. One of the big reasons I wanted to leave was my then husband. Well, he's my husband still. But when I started at Twitter, we were not yet married yet. We got married while I was at Twitter, but he was always based in Argentina and I was always based in the US. And so it had always been sort of this challenge to get me back to Argentina where we had initially met. And so eventually we did that. And I spent about 6 years, I guess, since leaving Twitter, pretty much writing books and doing some angel investing and advising work. And that was sort of how I saw my career for those 6 years. Part of it was I had 3 little kids in that time. I have a daughter now, she's 6, and I have twin boys who are 3. And so it was kind of hard for me to think about kind of the second half of what the, Claire 2.0 would look like. But I had this suspicion that kept growing bigger that it was going to be in investing. And my investing experience started probably about a year after I left Twitter, I took a course for female funders. And that was really pivotal and kind of jump-starting me. At that point, I'd advised some startups, and I think I'd been on 1 or 2 boards at that point. But it was really taking that course that kind of changed things for me. And I found that investing with small checks as an angel investor was a really great way to be connected to fascinating people making change, and also be able to kind of provide support and provide connections and do what I knew I was good at. So I guess about a year and a half ago, you and I started talking. And that was just at the beginning of sort of my journey to understand the VC ecosystem in Latin America, because I really didn't know much about it at all when you and I first started talking. And so we sort of, began chatting, and then, I guess I joined Magma about a year later.
So jumping back to the nonprofit and working at co-founding a nonprofit in an orphanage, what did you learn during that process that you can now use today to both as an investor and as working with startups?
I think what I most learned there was the relevance for what it's like to build a business or build any organization in an emerging market. I mean, you and I were just talking the other day. I live in Argentina. I've lived here now for 10 years or something, and Argentina is in complete economic free fall right now. We're at 38% interest rate. Everyone's taking their money out of the banks. It's a nightmare, right? And you said something to me on WhatsApp the other day, like the average Argentine. Do you remember exactly how you said it?
I think it's the average Argentine. Maybe I can't remember if I said average Argentine grandmother or just the average Argentine knows more about currency trading than all but the best Wall Street traders.
And I mean, this is 100% true, but it's also true just even beyond that sort of issue of currency, just in terms of the massive logistic, cluster F of trying to run a business in some of these emerging markets. It's incredible the type of resilience you have to develop as a founder. And I think, going back to my early days of being an expat out in Kenya and seeing how much harder it was to start an organization there, it just gives me incredible respect now for the founders who are doing this in Latin America. And it makes me really, really excited to back them at Magma.
One of my favorite lines from the podcast was in one of the first 10 episodes is Patricio Williams, who's from Argentina. And his line was that starting a business in Argentina is like running in mud. So if you can get out of the mud, you're going to be really, really successful, because if you can run in the mud, you're going to be able to run really fast once you're out.
And it's absolutely true. I mean, it's unbelievable how challenging it is to make something successful in some of these markets. I mean, literally the challenges that some of our entrepreneurs at Magma face on a daily basis in Latin America are things that would, set back a typical Silicon Valley founder for, 6 months into like a crisis of conscience or something. They're so challenging.
Yeah, I think Latin Americans in general are pretty good at startups, because you have to live with uncertainty as a founder. And even in the most stable countries, you're going to have probably up until probably more recently in the US, you're going to have more uncertainty than the average person would in a more developed country.
Oh, 100%. I mean, so when Argentina earlier this year first started going into, I don't even know, I guess it was then hyperinflation is when we first sort of started dipping into that, I showed up at a party for some of our friends. This was pre-COVID. And, when I walked in, they were like, "Oh, Claire, we should be bringing you a balloon, your first hyperinflation." I just had no concept of what we would be facing, in the next 9 months. I ran into another friend at the pharmacy the other day, and we were talking about, some horrible thing that happened in our neighborhood. There are lots of security issues coming up recently. And I was just like, "How do you deal with this?" And he said, "We're just great at crisis." Mm-hmm. And it's just incredible. But it's amazing to back founders who innately know how to bounce back and to pivot and to lean in and to lean out and to fail fast and do all that stuff that is on those posters in those tech offices that all the tech bros are looking at in Silicon Valley.
So you talked about doing some angel investing over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, before getting into more LatAm investing on your own, and then now full-time at Magma. Talk a little bit about the differences and similarities that you've seen being an investor, both from US market, but now to LatAm.
Yes, so that's a good question. I think there are sort of two things that stand out. One of them, I think, is just sort of the reality, which is that the valuations are very, very different a lot of the time. And so I think now, being used to these lower valuations in Latin America, it almost makes me more critical of a lot of the US deals I see. I love pre-seed investing. And so it's tough to kind of look at how high those valuations are right now in Silicon Valley and understand why we are going into deals like that. And I say we by, as the global collective of the investor community. But the other thing I would say that has been really useful is understanding the incredible power of making sure that you kind of always follow that great founder. And they don't necessarily have to have everything figured out in the beginning. They don't even necessarily have to have, one or two or three things really figured out. But if you see someone with a really good vision who you see as a really great founder, it's probably a good idea to back them, because if it's not this one, then it may be their next one. And, getting in close and being an important mentor or ally to that person early on is really important, because it's those early stages that really help kind of shape what a founder is going to turn out like later on. So if you think you can be a good ally or mentor, do it as early as possible. And I guess I would say that that's more important in Latin America than ever, because in Latin America, a lot of times we are seeing founders who are perhaps less polished or perhaps with less knowledge of fundraising and the Silicon Valley game. So it's kind of forcing you to kind of look beyond the CV essentially.
Yeah, I think if we look at our best investments in Magma so far, they're all around really good metrics and maybe not having the most polished CV pre-starting their business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's 100% true.
Do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, or documentaries you like to recommend to people, whether about startups or just life in general?
Yeah, so two of my favorite books of all time have nothing to do with startups, but I think that any entrepreneur or investor, or every entrepreneur and investor should be reading them. One of them it's about a 20-year-old book. It's called The Way of Transition by William Bridges. And it's an incredible book about change and bouncing back. And I think it brings up a lot of sort of the themes we've talked about today. These are things that I think I have to learn. I was raised in a privileged situation, and a lot of our founders here in LatAm know some of this stuff innately. But this book is just an incredible primer on, changing when change happens and embracing it and kind of finding who you are next and who your business is next as well. And then there's another book that is also kind of in the same space called Slowing Down to the Speed of Life. And I think it's just a wonderful book about the importance of kind of living in the now, which is super, super hard for me. But, everyone says is important, blah, blah, blah. It's a great book.
If you could go back to when you first started angel investing and looking at deals and thinking about Latin America, knowing everything you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, well, this is easy because the advice comes from my friend Marin. She started January Ventures, which is one of the 20 or so funds these days that only primarily invest in female founders. And there are about 20 of these. They're all in the US and Europe right now. There's none in Latin America or Asia, as far as I know. And she was just saying today how the deals she most regrets are the ones where it's an obviously very strong founder, but she doesn't know much about the market. And I thought that was really interesting, and it got me really thinking about sort of deals that I passed on. I don't know who told me to keep a log of this, but for a couple of years now, I've been keeping logs of like angel deals I didn't do, but wanted to do. And, maybe I didn't do because I didn't have the money, or I didn't do because I don't know, I just wasn't that convicted, but kind of thought I would, if I had unlimited dollars. And I think when I look back at this list, the deals where the founder was amazing, but I didn't know the market, are the ones that really, really stand out to me. So I think that's really wise advice.
What are you most excited about to work on at Magma and Brava over the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, I mean, I'm just, 149% excited to fund more female founders. And, I'm super excited with the 4 that we have in the portfolio right now: FlickPlay, Prometeo, the Intern Group, and Heffa. But I'm so excited to see some of the ones we're going to be finding in the next 6 months. And, I think that saying, diamond in the rough is kind of ridiculous now, because a lot of times these incredible female founders have actually pitched to other people before they get to us, but they just haven't been kind of given the credence that they should have been. So I think I shouldn't say they're diamonds in the rough, but I'm excited to find some amazing women and give them some money so that they can give me some money back.
That's a great place to stop, and it's going to be awesome to continue working together. And we're definitely going to have to do a 2.0 of this. There's so much more we could cover on both your background and advice to startups, and we'll definitely do another version of that in the next 6 to 9 months.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest, Claire Díaz-Ortiz. And thank you to Ángel Andraca for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.